Okay, so to kick things off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jackie Reelick. I'm a project manager for WestCOG and the program manager for our Regional Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. Also with me, who just introduced himself, is our Deputy Director, Mike Toll. He's going to kind of just hang on for some tech support and help facilitate the meeting. We also on the call, our program is supported by a consultant team. Um, Here with us today is Scott Choquette from Dewberry and Dave Murphy from Resilient Land and Water. They're going to be putting on the presentation today for us. So before I dive into tonight's agenda, I'd just like to provide a little bit of background on WestCOG and who we are if you're not familiar with us. We're one of 9 regional councils of government in the state of Connecticut. We serve 18 municipalities in Western Connecticut from New Milford all the way down to Greenwich. We assist and support our towns with planning activities and projects related to transportation, economic development, public safety, and the environment, which includes this regional flood assistance program. For some background on the program, we started it in 2022 because we recognized the substantial impact of increasing flooding events and disasters in recent years, and the federal funding opportunities that are available to both municipalities and property owners to address this. But we've also recognized that the grant programs can be very complex, and often require technical assistance to get through the application process. So our program's intended to provide free technical assistance, and support to our towns and their communities to pursue these grant opportunities. And as of last year, our program's been really successful. We've received selections for over 70% of the applications that we've submitted. So we're excited to continue assisting more municipalities and more residents with these opportunities. Before we do get started with the presentation, we kind of just want to get a feel for who's on the call today. So if you could put your name and the town that you're from in the chat, we'll give you a couple minutes to do so. Okay, great. I'm seeing a lot of coastal towns. All right. And then we just have another question or two. If you could please raise your hand if you're a property owner that's been impacted by flooding. To raise your hand, you can click on the React button down on the bar below. Okay, great. Seeing a couple hands up. All right. And if you could also raise your hand if you are a business owner or commercial property, if we have any on the call today. Okay, see a couple. All right, great. And so I do see there's also a couple municipal staff members as well on this call, which is fantastic. Um, this presentation is going to be more geared towards property owners, but there are grants available for municipalities as well, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have on those after the presentation today. So to give an idea of how things are going to go, we're here till 8 p.m. We're going to start off with a presentation on available flood mitigation grant programs. Then after the presentation concludes, we're going to follow that with a question and answer session where you can answer or ask any questions that you might have. And then if we have time, which I anticipate we will, because the presentation shouldn't take too long, we're also going to set up some breakout sessions at the end so that people have the opportunity to have a one-on-one meeting with our team members just to discuss your property and how we might be able to help you. We'll go into more detail about how that will work after the presentation, but don't worry if you can't stick around for that. We will have a contact form that you can fill out, and we'll follow up with you. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it along to Scott Choquette, our lead consultant with our program, to give on the presentation.
All right, thank you, Jackie. I'm going to attempt to share a screen. All right, sorry for the technical difficulties. Almost to be expected with these meetings. Good evening, everybody. Scott Choquette with Dewberry Engineers. We are a team of my firm and Resilient Land and Water. We're helping WestCOG administer the program and screen properties and help with grant applications and submittals and all the components that come with that. Briefly, the agenda, we're going to try to keep the presentation portion of this pretty quick tonight. So we did some introductions via the chat. We're going to talk about the currently available FEMA funding programs, kind of the process that we need to follow to go through that, to apply and to implement projects, what kind of support can be provided, and then have some time for question and answers. And then, as Jackie mentioned, some individual breakout sessions, hopefully for some data collection and initial discussions about with folks who are potentially interested in moving forward. Next slide. So we're going to talk about 3 programs tonight: the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, the FEMA Swift Current Program, which is associated with the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, and the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. I will say for the municipal folks on the call, I'm sure you're aware of the BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program. That program is also available in this year's cycle, but currently this presentation is focused more on individual properties and elevations and acquisitions. So we will make time later in the presentation to answer questions about BRIC if anybody has any, but for now we're going to focus on these 3 programs. Next slide. So also focusing today on repetitive loss properties. A repetitive loss property is a property that's had at least 2 paid flood losses of more than $1,000 each in any given 10-year period since 1978. So the invitations to the meetings were sort of mostly focused on repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss properties. And you can also, I think it's important to note, come on and off of that list and note, if you note the 10-year period since 1978. So it's possible that you could have had repetitive flood losses, but if you haven't had one in a decent amount of time, you may be on or off of that list, and we can help with discussing that with you later in the presentation. A severe repetitive loss property is one that's had 4 or more separate claims with payments of $5,000 or more, including building damages or contents, or 2 or more separate claim payments to the building only where the total exceeded the current value of the property. And also within that same 10 years of each other. And also you could fall off that list. But these programs that we'll talk about how benefit these 2 types of properties, but it's not to say that you're not eligible for a grant if you're not a rep loss or a severe rep loss property. But we just wanted to put those definitions out in front of you at the beginning of the meeting. Next slide. So the first program, the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program, this one is an annual program, so it's not dependent on a disaster. It is currently open with a deadline, a state deadline of March 14th, 2025 to submit applications, which, as you can imagine, is pretty close to as you know, is pretty close to the date of this meeting. This program is directly related to savings to the National Flood Insurance Program. It's a 25% cost share program generally. There's some variations from that, but to simplify things, it's 25% cost share. And what that means is that if you're awarded a grant, the federal government would pay 75% of the cost of your project, and you would be responsible for the other 25%. The way all these programs work is that the state is the grantee, which means that FEMA provides the grant to the state, and the state enters into an agreement with the town or the city as the subgrantee. And then the subgrantee would work with the individual property owners in order to make the project happen. Uh, you have to be each town has to be a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program, which is not an issue in Connecticut because all of our towns are. And it's a reimbursement based program. So what that means is if you make it to the finish line and the town gets a sub grant and you contract with the town to do your project, you have to put the money up front and get reimbursed on a quarterly basis as the project is completed. Next slide. Some of the eligibility requirements. Applicants and sub-applicants must have a FEMA approved hazard mitigation plan prior to the application deadline, which again is not a problem. There's a regional plan at the WestCOG level, and all the communities that are part of the WestCOG, including all the participants on this call, are covered by that plan. Sub-applicants, again, the cities or towns must participate in the NFIP, which they all do. And then all structures included in the project sub-applications must be insured under the NFIP before, during, and after the disaster. So what that means is on the date that the notice of funding availability is posted by the government, you have to have a flood insurance policy, and you have to maintain that policy throughout the life of the project and promise to maintain it after the project is completed. Next slide. Eligible types of projects under this FMA program, Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, are things like home elevations, lifting your house up and putting it on a new foundation so that the first floor of living space is at or above the estimated flood elevation. Property acquisition, if you've been flooded enough times that you just want out of your property, if you're eligible, the property can be acquired and the land turned over in the form of open space to the community, paying fair market value for the property. And then mitigation reconstruction, lastly, which is very, very rare in the state of Connecticut. And that's primarily if you've been substantially damaged by an event and it's cheaper to build a new structure to all the modern day codes and requirements. There's partial funding that could be available in order to assist with the portion of that project that makes your home more resilient. So we're really focused tonight mostly on home elevation and property acquisition projects. There are other municipal projects which are available under the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, such as studies and drainage projects that might impact repetitive loss or severe repetitive loss properties. But we're really here tonight to talk mostly with homeowners about individual flood mitigation assistance projects. If there's questions about the other municipal projects that are eligible, we're happy to answer those questions later in the program. Next slide. These are just a couple of examples of home elevation projects. If you're on the shoreline in the V zone or velocity zone, which is usually on the immediate shoreline, you can elevate your home with the lowest floor above the elevation up on piers or pilings. In that area below the lowest floor has to be open to the passage of water without any impediments. This picture on the right is a little misleading because you can build cosmetic walls around the foundation area, but they have to be able to break away from the building in the event of a flood event without causing damage to the building. If you're inland or away from the immediate shoreline in a zone, then your lowest floor still has to be above the base flood elevation. However, you can have an area below there where this enclosed but has no livable space in it that can be basically floodable space where you put openings in the foundation and allows the water to go in and out of the home. If you have a basement in that situation, which is any area below ground elevation, you have to sacrifice that space and bring the ground elevation up to match the exterior ground elevation and let the water basically flow underneath the house in order to, without causing damages to the foundation. Next slide.
I do see, Mike, you have your hand
Yeah, just quick
raised.
check-in. I'm assuming everyone still sees the shared screen. On my end, I was doing some work and for me, it turned off. It looks like it's still on. Just want to confirm that. Okay, good.
Yep,
Thank you.
I can
All right. Carry on. Thank you.
see if anyone, yep, yes to shared screen. Thank you.
All right. Next slide. This next slide is just another demonstration of exactly what I said before. Again, in that velocity zone in the diagram on the left, it shows a building elevated up on piers or pilings with that low living floor above the flood elevation. And then over on the right, the diagram shows an inland or an A zone building where you could potentially still have a crawl space, but that first floor of living space has to be above the flood elevation, and the space below there has to be floodable. So no furnaces, no infrastructure, no utilities or mechanicals in that area. They all have to be elevated onto the first floor, and none of that can be below ground level. So if you picture it, you don't want the water coming in and pooling in a basement like a swimming pool. The idea here is that the water needs to be able to flow through and under the first floor of the house without causing any damage. So those are a really oversimplified explanation of the two types of elevations that are available under the program. Next slide. All right, so that is the flood mitigation assistance program. Again, annual based every year, not depending on disasters. The FMA Swift Current program is a newer program. It's only available after a presidentially declared disaster. We currently in the state of Connecticut have a presidentially declared disaster from the late fall flooding last year. Important to point out that these disaster declaration dependent programs does not mean that your town or your county or region necessarily had to experience that disaster. So I give a kind of more radical example. If there was a tornado in Talon County that qualified the state for a presidentially declared disaster, you can apply for funding to do a flood mitigation project in Fairfield County. So all it takes is a statewide disaster. So after a presidentially declared disaster, the Swift Current program is available. It basically has all the same rules as the flood mitigation assistance program. This current fiscal year 2024 funding for that program in Connecticut is expected to be $20 million. It's currently open for applications, and the deadline for this program is May 5th. And again, this particular program provides funding to reduce flood damages to rep loss properties, severe rep loss properties, and substantially damaged properties. So just to back up and clarify a bit, on the FMA program that I talked about a minute ago, it gives preferential treatment to rep loss and severe rep loss properties, but you don't absolutely have to be one in order to apply. With this particular program, you have to be on that list. In every other way, it parallels the FMA program, the same exact flood insurance requirements that I mentioned, the same 25% on you, 75% on the government cost share. Again, the state is the grantee, the city or town is the sub-grantee. They enter into an agreement with the property owner, and all the same eligibility requirements apply. Next slide. Again, eligible project types under this program: acquisition of a building. And when I say acquisition, if you meet the requirements, they will purchase the property at fair market value and you give up the land and it gets put into open space in perpetuity. And typically the city or town takes ownership of the land. Um, Other things like dry flood proofing of historic residences or non-residential buildings. Dry flood proofing is not allowed for your typical residential building. Non-structural retrofits of existing buildings and facilities, that mitigation reconstruction that we talked about, and then structural retrofitting of existing buildings, which pretty much translates to elevation for residential buildings. Next slide. The third and final program is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Again, think back that the FMA one is annual. The SWIFT current is related to a presidential disaster declaration. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is also related to a presidential disaster declaration. So we currently have an active declaration from the flooding last year. Typically 15% of the total damages from a flooding event or a storm event are set aside for hazard mitigation projects. This program is not directly linked to rep loss or severe rep loss or to the National Flood Insurance Program, but is similar in most other ways. Same cost share, 25% local, 75% federal. Same requirements for grantee and subgrantee. Same requirements for hazard mitigation plan that we all meet. And this again is a reimbursement-based program. And the most recent open disaster is the severe storm and flooding one that happened from back in August or September of last year. So there is an opportunity for probably another 6 months or so to apply for grant money under this program. Next slide. Eligible project types, pretty much the same. Under this one, there's a little bit more flexibility in terms of projects that reduce flooding. The key thing to keep in mind is under all these programs, the flooding has to cause damages to a building or infrastructure. So if you have flooding in your yard or flooding in a garage or an appurtenant structure, typically it's very hard to meet the requirements for these programs. They're really designed to reduce damages to buildings and infrastructure. So this one can do things like, culvert repairs and things that the town would take responsibility for that would prevent damages from, to things or harm to people. And this particular one we're here tonight to talk about flooding, but this one, you can do projects that prevent damages from wind and other types of natural disasters. Next slide. So the role of the partners involved in this, it's a FEMA grant program that is the federal government that provides these grants. The Connecticut Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security is the state partner. What their role is they solicit for applications, they receive them, they prioritize them, and then they forward them on to FEMA for concurrence and approval. They also become, as I mentioned a couple times now, the grantee. FEMA grants the money to the state grants the money to the city or town enters into an agreement with the property owner. There's a Connecticut Interagency Hazard Mitigation Committee that is basically a group of, as the name implies, different organizations and departments throughout the state that helps DEMIS or emergency management to prioritize the projects each year after the application deadline. And then again, the cities and towns have to basically be the sponsor and agree to administer the grant. WestCOG's available to give some support in administering the grant. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then typically what happens is the city or town enters into an agreement with the property owner and the property owner completes the project and seeks reimbursement on some regular basis, typically quarterly. Next slide. I apologize. I've been talking all day and my voice is cutting out. So I'm doing my best to keep it steady. Application requirements. All projects have to pass a FEMA benefit cost analysis. And what that means is essentially for every dollar that the federal or that the project costs, you have to prove that that project is going to save more than a dollar. So in order to do a benefit cost analysis, we need an elevation certificate or some type of elevation survey for the property. Historical damages or claims help, and I'll talk about why in a minute. We'll eventually need a cost estimate for how much it would cost to elevate or acquire the property. Occasionally, an appraisal or other form of value proof is needed. So, how this model works essentially for flooding is it looks at the FEMA floodplain map, it looks at the floodplain elevation, and in the flood insurance study, there's also elevations for different return frequencies. So it's not just the 100-year flood that we hear about all the time. There's different return frequencies for these flooding events. But it basically looks at the useful life of the project, how much flooding a particular property would get, and that's where the elevations come in handy. Would it go in the basement? Would it go in the garage? Or would it come up into the first floor? And then they apply a depth of damage curve, which basically estimates based on the depth of the water how much damage your building would get over the useful life of a project, which is typically 50 years. And it comes up, the model comes up with an estimated amount of damages that that particular building could anticipate over its useful life. That is the benefits that you get. The avoidance of those losses are the benefits that you get from doing a project. So then you got to get estimates for how much it costs to do the project. And if the cost of doing the project is less than the benefits of doing the project, then you've passed the benefit cost analysis. You have a benefit cost ratio greater than 1, and that's the biggest hurdle to being approved for a project. It also requires an alternative analysis, which is just simply saying why an elevation or an acquisition is the best alternative. And then there are some requirements for assurances that say that you're willing and able to come up with the matching 25% funds. Excellent. There are some instances where it's called pre-calculated benefits, where you do not necessarily have to pass that benefit cost analysis or have a positive benefit cost ratio. Those are limited to buildings that are in a FEMA mapped floodplain with total projected costs less than the predetermined benefits and a lowest floor elevation below the base flood elevation. So if your floor is below the flood elevation on the FEMA map, and you're in the floodplain, FEMA has determined that for acquisitions under $775,000 is eligible, and elevations under $355,000 are eligible. And there's some adjustment allowed for location factors in the benefit cost tool, but those are generally rules where if you think that the project can be done under these numbers, you may not necessarily have to pass a benefit cost analysis. I will tell you that these numbers are very low for the state of Connecticut. Jackie talked about the success that we've had to date with some of the grant applications, and so far to date, we've only had one that did not pass a benefit cost analysis, but was funded because it made it under the predetermined, pre-calculated benefits. But it's worth knowing and talking about. Next slide. So some of the steps in the process. And this slide, the things in blue are things that we, WestCOG, and the consulting team can help with. Some of them are for the homeowners to pay attention to, some are for the cities and towns to pay attention to. But generally, after meetings like this, we talk to people one on one and dig into the cases a little bit more clearly and figure out who's serious about moving forward. Um, we we being WestCOG and the team can do that benefit cost analysis screening. Usually, it's fairly simple to determine which projects are likely to pass and which ones are not. Um, Occasionally, the screening will be close enough where we'll have to request additional information. But we also help with the data gathering and the research on losses and the recurrence intervals and all the things that are required to run the model. We can come up with some of those elevations using online methods and different tools that we have. But if the benefit cost ratio is very close to one, you will need an elevation certificate. Typically, we were finding like 50% of folks have them, 50% don't. So if you're close, we may need you to get one of those. An appraisal, if needed. In the screening, we simply look at, if you have a recent appraisal, we're happy to use it. If you don't, we look at the tax appraisals, which we all know are not precise or intended for precise use, but we can use them for screening. If the screening shows you're very close, you might need an appraisal. Then if everything looks good after that screening, you'll need to get contractor bids for the elevation. We can review those bids. We're familiar with what components of the bid are eligible for FEMA funding under the program and which components are not, so we can help fine tune those. After all those pieces are in place, we can do the full benefit cost analysis. There's other components to the application that look at environmental and historic preservation reviews. Is it technically feasible to elevate the particular building? We can help with all those things, including the grant preparation. If you receive a grant, again, the things in white are between FEMA and the state and the town, and then the town and the property owner. There are the permits and approvals are between the property owner and the city or town, and then any engineering that's needed. Occasionally, some buildings are easier to elevate than others. Occasionally, engineering or architectural work is needed. We can help provide technical review and inspection of that work. Cost change as that work happens. We can update the benefit cost analysis with the actual costs as they come in. We can help review as-built certifications to ensure that the cities and towns are meeting the requirements of the grant, and we can help with the FEMA state project closeout requirements. So basically, the things in white are things that are between the property owner and the city and town, and all the things on this screen in blue are things that we can help with. Next slide. All right. That's a lot of information to absorb in a very short amount of time. So I think Jackie may take us through this data collection exercise, and then I think we're going to open it up to some basic Q&A before we look at sessions.
Yep. Thank you, Scott. So this slide is just kind of a precursor to what we'll kind of go over in the breakout sessions if people do stick around for that. Depending on what you're looking to pursue in terms of a project to reduce or eliminate your risk to flooding. This slide kind of provides the data that we'll need and additional information that we'll need to move forward in the process. But again, when we do those breakout sessions, we'll have that up with us and we'll go through it with you. So we'll talk about that in a few moments, but for right now, here are our contacts. If you do have any questions or would like to reach out to any of us, you can reach us by email. I also, before we move on to the breakout sessions, I'm going to put up a poll that is kind of acts as a contact form for anyone who is interested in receiving more information about the program. If you can't stick around for a breakout session, but you'd still like to get into contact with us, just please fill this form out. It has your name, email, and just a very brief description of, the flooding that you're experiencing, and any potential project that you want to discuss. So I'm going to launch that right now and give everybody a few minutes to answer it before we move on. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, but again, please put in the chat if you'd like me to send a link for you to fill it out. Thank you all for answering. All right, I'm going to close the poll. And then we're going to move on to the breakout sessions. So what we're going to do with the breakout sessions is there's 3 team members. There's myself, Scott Choquette, who just gave the presentation from Dewberry, Dave Murphy from Resilient Land and Water. The 3 of us will stick around. We're here till 8 p.m. Um, so, we'll go forward with that. But before actually we move on, I'm going to open it up to any additional questions that you might have before we get into those one-on-one sessions. So if you have any questions on the presentation, please just raise your hand and we'll call on you. All right, so I'm seeing no questions. If
How
nobody
do
has,
how do
oh,
you I'm on my phone because it wouldn't work on my computer, so I can only see you
I see.
and I'm
No
really having
worries.
trouble figuring anything out on this. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
it's okay. There's a react button at the bottom, but if you can't
Okay.
find it, feel free to put in the chat that you have a question or turn on
I
your mic.
tried to
So
I put it in the chat and it wouldn't send. So I'm like,
go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Lucy.
feel free to.
okay, I live in Wilton. I've been here for a really long time. My house is along a river. I've dealt with Allstate flood insurance, FEMA a couple times. Got really flooded out in August in that horrific storm. It came within my, I'm an artist. It was in my, totally flooded out my studio, moved the shed on my property, came within an inch of the house. My house was completely surrounded. So I'd really like to raise my house, like to elevate it. So help.
Okay, great.
So,
We'll make sure that you get in on a breakout session if you want to have a one-on-one with one of us and we can
sure.
discuss that further.
Okay.
Um, do you have any specific questions about the presentation or any of the grant
No,
programs?
no, they were really good. They were,
Okay,
I wish I'd been on my computer and not on my phone because it'd be easier to do it, but that's fine. It's all good.
no worries. Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks.
Okay, if anyone else has any other questions. Okay, Anthony, I see you have your hand raised. You can go
Yes.
ahead.
Are you able to hear
Yes.
me?
Yep,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Yeah. So I've worked with you guys in the past, and I submitted an application over a year ago. I'm just curious, what sort of success rate are you guys having with actually? And I'm sorry, I missed the first 10 minutes or so of the presentation. So if you went over it, I apologize. But I'm just curious what sort of success rate you've been having with having grants accepted and granted.
Sure. So, we recently submitted applications in the last round, in the last fiscal year, for fiscal year 2023. We've had like just over 75% success rate with the applications we've submitted. For reference, we submitted under our WestCOG program, 8 project applications and 6 were selected under the various programs that we went over today. So that included FMA, and HMGP. So we had 6 out of the 8 selected for one of those. 3 of those selections were through the FMA program, which is geared towards property owners. And then also Scott, with Dewberry, he also has a contract with the town of Darien where he does similar projects and applications. And Darien is part of our region, so we do kind of count that as well, just to give an idea of the success throughout the state of Connecticut. But he submitted four applications on behalf of the town of Darien, and all four were selected in this last round.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right. Are there any other questions? I'm just going to check the chat. I don't see any there. Again, feel free to raise your hand if you can find the button. If not, feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just jump in if you can't find the button.
Okay, one quick question
Sure.
is just with the current new administration, are these grants going to suddenly disappear? I hate to ask that question, but it is pertinent.
That's okay. We anticipated it. At the moment, we're all kind of in a similar position. We're monitoring the situation, to the best of our ability with all the changes that are going on at the moment. But most of these programs are annual, and they come back every year. So, although we don't know at this moment, if there will be any changes, we are still going to follow, our usual business and operations, because we don't want to lose any time on any applications. The state still has the information up for grant applications and accepting applications. So we're really just going to follow their lead, that they're still pursuing at this time. But if Scott or David, if you guys can always jump in too if I forgot anything.
No, I think that covers it. Nobody really knows is the honest answer. Doing this for an awful long time, and most administrative changes they come and go. They repackage them. They give them different names, but generally these grants are usually fairly well accepted on a bipartisan basis. But it's anybody's guess. Even the folks at FEMA don't really know. We're hopeful.
Thank you.
Of course, hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
No problem. All right. Any other questions? All right. I see a question just came up in the chat. How do low income people qualify? So that's a great question, Katie. These programs, although there are aspects to these grant programs that will consider, environmental justice communities or disadvantaged communities in the application process, these grant programs are primarily focused on flood damages, and where your property is located in terms of flooding. So you can still qualify no matter what your income is for the grant program, as long as you can prove that you've had damages that will, um, you know, be an eligible project and be cost effective. That's really primarily what they're looking at. So if you can meet that eligibility requirement, and like Scott went over in the presentation, pass that benefit cost analysis, then you're typically eligible. And I mean, there are also some variations with the cost share, for disadvantaged communities as well. Sometimes, the federal cost share will increase in that case. And hopefully that answered your question. I'd be happy to put it in the chat as well. Okay, great. I see Dan, at what point in the process does funding get protected from the administration? For example, once FEMA provides the funds to Demis for a specific application, does that guarantee the funds are unretractable?
So I can take a shot at that one. Short answer is nobody knows that for sure. However, I will say that funding that was committed last last year before the administration change appears to be going forward. There's award letters being signed, and projects are being funded. So there's no clear cut answer or guarantee on it, but it appears that the government is honoring their awards from the last round.
Hopefully, Dan, that answered your question. Oh, since this is a reimbursable program, doesn't that push the risk to homeowners?
I wish I could answer that question with some definite with some confidence, but this is an entirely new thing that we're experiencing, so I don't know for sure whether that risk is passed on. I completely understand the concern, and I wish I could tell you that no, it's not, but we don't know that for 100%.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott. All right, are there any other questions, either in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself again. I'll give it a minute. Okay, let's see. Raz says, will the information be online? Yes. I'm currently recording this session. Once we conclude, I'm going to post both the recording and the presentation slides on our website. I believe that Mike dropped our website link in the chat. I will put it in right now. If you go to our website, it's westcog.org/FMA. And I just put that in the link, the chat and the link. You can go to that link and it'll have information on our program, my contact information, and that's where the information will be posted.
Can you say that again? Repeat that, please. 'Cause
Yep. So,
I'm not getting the chat for some reason.
oh, no worries. So Mike just posted, yep, in the chat. It's westcog.org/FMA. So
FMA.
I
Okay.
could, yep, I could spell it for you if you'd like to.
No, that's fine. I think that's good. Thank you.
Okay, and Lucy,
Yep.
if you go to the WestCOG website, just type in WestCOG in Google search, it'll come right up.
Oh,
And in that website, you go to planning and under, there's multiple tabs that take you there. So you go to environmental, you go to public safety, you'll
okay.
find the list of the program. The flood
Great.
assistance program.
Thank you. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
And I will also put, once we get into the breakout sessions, I'll put up on the slide, or I can put it even in the chat as well, my email. So you could also reach out to me as well, and I can give that to you.
Okay. Or maybe send a follow-up email to all of us.
Yeah, yeah. If you filled out that poll, I'll have
I
all your
did.
information.
Yeah. Thank,
Perfect. I'll send that over.
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I see Carol from Old Greenwich. Can you get flood insurance from a private insurer? I'll let Scott take this one. I believe you can as long as it is under the National Flood Insurance Program. But Scott, I'll let you take that question.
You can. I'm not at all an expert in the insurance side of the program. There are write your own companies that you can buy a policy directly from the federal government under the National Flood Insurance Program, and then there are private providers that write the policies, and those policies are guaranteed by the federal government. In some instances, if a property doesn't qualify or needs more coverage than the flood insurance program provides, you can buy policies from companies like Lloyd's London or other folks who will write policies out completely unrelated to the program. Again, full disclosure, I'm not an insurance expert whatsoever. Those are the uh, basic components of it that I understand.
I see Matt put in the chat, many companies will insure, but some will not. I just did this 2 weeks ago. Quotes under 3,000, but then when asking to write it, the cheapest was 5,884.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt, for that input. Hopefully that answered your question, Carol.
You. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh, you can. Oh, all right. Well, I got a letter in the mail, and it's very concerning because it's flood insurance is expensive, especially for retirees. It's $3,000 a year, and
Yep.
I've never had to use it, but I can't go without it. So I just wondered if that's legitimate. If they can you go to a private? Someone sent me a letter, private flood insurance alternative. So it is legitimate then. All right, I'll try it anyway and see what happens. Thank you.
Yeah, there's options. Again, it depends too on the if there's a mortgage, it depends on the bank's requirements, et cetera. But there are private options.
Right. So maybe I could save a little money. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Give it one more minute, see if anything comes through in the chat.
Well, I know. Can you hear me again?
Yep.
Yep.
I just wondered, like, you can't get a grant though to help you get flood insurance. I've never had, I live on the water, but I've never, thank God, in over 100 years, we've never had water other than in the basement. But my question is there anyone to help you get a grant or anything for flood insurance, or is that out of the question?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know, Scott, if you or David, if you know of anything.
Save some money this year.
Right. Yeah, it is expensive.
It is, yeah. So no one knows it. All right, I'll try this one person that wrote to me, but it's probably not going to work out because
Yeah.
someone answered here and said one company declined due to proximity to the Long Island Sound. Well, I'm practically on the Long Island Sound, so we'll see what happens. All right, thank
Yeah,
you.
the positive of the flood insurance program, aside from the cost, is that they'll write a policy for pretty much any situation if you're able to pay for it. The private insurers outside of the program get to pick and choose whether they want to write a policy or not.
Thank you again.
You're welcome, Carol. Okay, we'll give it another minute for any questions, and if not, we'll move on to the breakout sessions if anybody would like to stick around for one.